My name is Elena, and for as long as I can remember, my family ran on one unspoken rule: my brother could do no wrong. It wasn't something anyone ever said out loud. It didn't need to be. I saw it in the way my father's face lit up the moment Derek walked into a room. I saw it in the way my mother set his plate down first at dinner, always first, even when I was already at the table waiting. I saw it in the way they handed him the keys to the family business on his 30th birthday like it was the most natural thing in the world, and handed me a title, a desk in the corner, and a smile that said, "Be grateful we let you stay." For 6 years, I kept my head down and did the work. I built relationships with our clients. I restructured 2 failing accounts that Derek had nearly run into the ground. I stayed late while he left early, and took long lunches he charged to the company card. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself the work would speak for itself. That someday, my father would look at the numbers and see what I had built, and understand that I was not just Derek's little sister filling a seat. I was the reason Callaway Logistics was still standing. I was wrong. The morning it all fell apart started like any other. I drove into the office on a Tuesday, coffee in hand, already mentally drafting the quarterly report I needed to finish before the client meeting at 2. The parking lot was half empty. My father's car was already there, which was unusual for 8 in the morning. So was Derek's. I noticed but didn't stop to think about it. I never stopped to think. I made it as far as the hallway outside my father's office before I heard the voices through the door. Derek's, low and controlled the way it always was when he was performing calmness. My father's, sharper, tighter, carrying that edge it only had when something had gone seriously wrong. I stood there for a moment. I should have kept walking. Instead, I listened. "She's been redirecting invoices," Derek said. "Small amounts at first. I didn't want to believe it, so I waited. I documented everything. It's all in the file." The floor tilted beneath me. "Elena?" My father's voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Dad. I know how much this hurts." I pushed the door open. They both turned at the same time. My father was behind his desk, a thick manila folder open in front of him. Derek was seated across from him, his expression carefully arranged into something that looked like grief. He had practiced this, I realized. He had sat in front of a mirror and rehearsed exactly how a man looks when he is reluctantly destroying his sister. "What is this?" I asked. My father looked at me the way you look at someone you no longer recognize. "Elena," he said, "I need you to explain something." I crossed the room and looked at the folder. Pages of transaction records, line items highlighted in yellow, a spreadsheet I didn't recognize with my name in the header column. My name, my employee ID, numbers I had never touched. "Those aren't mine," I said. Derek leaned back in his chair. "That's what I thought you'd say." I turned to him. I felt something cold move through me, the kind of cold that starts in the chest and doesn't leave. "You did this." He didn't deny it. He didn't have to. He just looked at me with those steady eyes of his and said, "Dad, I think we need to give her some time to think about how she wants to handle this." My father closed the folder. His jaw was tight. He wouldn't look at me directly. "Elena, until we can sort out what happened here, I think it's best if you take some time away from the office." I stood there. Take some time. As if I had asked for a vacation. As if my brother hadn't just spent God knows how long building a paper trail designed to look like I had been stealing from our own family's company. "How long?" I asked. My voice was steadier than I expected. My father finally looked up. "Until the audit is complete." I looked at Derek one more time. He gave me nothing. No smirk, no tell, no flicker of anything behind his eyes. That was the most frightening part. He had become very good at this. I picked up my badge from my desk, my laptop bag, and the small framed photo I kept next to my monitor. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and stared at the steering wheel for a long time. The worst part wasn't what he'd done. The worst part was how long it must have taken him to do it. This wasn't a moment of jealousy. This wasn't impulsive. He had planned this carefully, methodically, over months while eating dinner across from me on holidays, while texting me articles he thought I'd find funny, while standing next to me at our grandmother's funeral. He had been building the case against me the entire time. My phone buzzed. My sister-in-law, Natalie. "Hey, just heard what happened. I'm sure it's all a misunderstanding. Try not to worry too much. These things work themselves out." I read the message twice. Then I put my phone face down on the passenger seat and drove. I had a savings account that was separate from anything connected to Callaway Logistics. That was the first thing I thought about clearly, somewhere on the highway, the city growing smaller behind me. I had about $4,000 in it. Not a fortune, but enough to breathe for a few weeks if I was careful. What I didn't have was a clear path forward. My entire professional life was tied to that company. My references were people who now believed I had been stealing from it. My father had not asked me a single follow-up question. He had looked at a folder Derek prepared and made a decision before I had even walked through the door. I drove to my apartment and sat on the edge of my bed and let myself feel all of it. The humiliation and the fury, and underneath both of those, the grief. Because even when your family fails you, even when you see it happen in real time, there is still grief. There is still the version of them you spent your whole life believing in. And losing that version hurts in a way that is different from everything else. I gave myself until midnight. I cried. I sat in silence. I made a list of every document I could think of that might prove the records Derek had shown my father were fabricated. Then I slept. The next morning, I started looking for a lawyer. Her name was Carol, and she had the kind of office that looked modest, but said everything about the people she had gone up against and won. She listened to me for 40 minutes without interrupting. When I finished, she folded her hands on her desk and asked me one question. Is there anyone inside that company who you trust completely? I thought about it. There was one person. Her name was June. She had been our office manager for 11 years, which meant she had been there longer than me, longer than Derek's current version of himself, long enough to remember what the company looked like before Derek decided he needed more of it. We had never been close in the way you are with friends outside of work, but she was the kind of person who noticed everything and said very little, and I had always trusted that combination. I texted her that night. I kept it simple. I need to talk to you. Not about work officially. Just talk, she replied within 10 minutes. Thursday. The coffee place on Meridian. 8 a.m. I spent the 2 days between that text and Thursday, the way you spend time when you have nothing left to do but wait and think. I went through my personal email looking for any documentation I'd sent to myself over the years, forwarded reports, notes on client calls, anything with timestamps that would place me in the right work and the wrong financial records on the same days. I found more than I expected. Not enough on its own, but enough to show a pattern. I also started applying to jobs, not because I had given up, but because I needed to feel like I was moving in some direction, and that was something I could control. Thursday came. June was already at the table when I arrived, hands wrapped around a mug, her expression unreadable the way it always was until she decided it wasn't. She let me talk first. I laid out everything: the folder, the highlighted transactions, the spreadsheet with my name, the way my father had already decided before I walked in. June listened the way she always did, completely still, eyes on me the whole time. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know about the account." I went very still. "Not your account," she said. "The one he created. I found it 6 weeks ago when I was reconciling vendor payments. There was a routing discrepancy I couldn't explain, so I pulled the original authorization records." She paused. "The authorizations were signed under your employee credentials, but the IP address on the digital signatures was his office computer." I stared at her. "You have this documentation?" "I have copies," she said. "I made them the same day I found it. I wasn't sure what to do with them. I didn't want to bring them to your father without more, and I didn't want to bring them to Derek for obvious reasons." She reached into her bag and slid a sealed envelope across the table. I was waiting for someone to ask the right question. I took the envelope. My hands were steady in a way I didn't expect. "Why didn't you come to me?" I asked. She looked at me with something patient and a little tired. "Because I wasn't sure if you already knew. And if you did, I didn't want to be involved. But you didn't know." She paused. "I can see it. You had no idea." I hadn't cried since that first night. I didn't cry now either. But something shifted. Something that had been pulled so tight in my chest since Tuesday morning finally moved. Just slightly. Just enough. Carol reviewed the documentation that same afternoon. She called me 2 hours after I dropped it off. "This is enough to open a formal inquiry," she said. "But I want to be careful about how we move. If your father receives this the wrong way, he could close ranks before we get ahead of it. We need to present this in a way that makes it impossible to dismiss." "How do we do that?" I asked. "We bring it to someone he can't ignore," she said. "The company's outside auditor." The audit had already been requested as part of how my father intended to confirm what Derek had shown him. Carol's approach was to get ahead of it to provide the alternative evidence to the auditor directly. with a formal letter establishing the discrepancy in the IP authorization records, before Derek had the chance to shape the narrative further. It took 9 days. 9 days of not hearing from my father except for one text that said the process is ongoing. Please be patient. 9 days of Natalie sending me cheerful messages that I read as surveillance. 9 days of applying to jobs and hearing nothing back, which I understood my former title was listed on my resume, and anyone who called that company for a reference would reach someone who currently believed I had committed fraud. I ran into my mother at the grocery store on day 6. She was in the produce section, and she saw me before I saw her. She had that look on her face, the one I had grown up interpreting as love, but had recently started to understand was something closer to managed discomfort. She wanted to be supportive in a way that cost her nothing. "Honey," she said, and touched my arm. "Your father is really torn up about all of this." I looked at her for a moment. I thought about what I wanted to say and what would actually be worth saying. "Tell him to call me," I said. Then I put 2 apples in my basket and walked to a different aisle. The auditor's name was Robert, and according to Carol, he had an unimpeachable professional reputation and 0 patience for being misled. He reviewed the materials we submitted. He requested the original server logs from the company's IT system independently, which Derek would not have anticipated because those logs were not part of what Derek had shown my father. They were technical infrastructure records that required a specific request to access. Those logs confirmed what June's documentation suggested. The financial transactions attributed to my credentials had been initiated from Derek's office terminal on dates when I had either been off-site at client meetings, with external records and timestamps, not logged into the system at all. On day 11, Carol called me. "The auditor has submitted his preliminary findings to your father," she said. "The meeting is tomorrow morning." I wore the same suit I had worn to my first day at Callaway Logistics. I didn't know why, exactly, maybe because I wanted to walk in as the same person who had walked in the first time, the one who believed the work was enough. Maybe because I had something to prove that had nothing to do with my brother. My father was already in the conference room when Carol and I arrived. He looked older than he had 11 days ago. The folder Derek had given him was nowhere in sight. Robert was at the end of the table, his expression professional and closed. Derek was not there. My father looked at me when I sat down, and for the first time in 11 days, his eyes didn't slide away. Robert reviewed the findings in precise, careful language. He explained the IP discrepancy. He explained the server logs. He explained the timeline gaps. He laid out, without editorializing, what the evidence indicated that the records attributed to my credentials had been generated from another employee's workstation, and that the documentation presented to my father 11 days ago was not what it purported to be. My father said nothing for a long time after Robert finished. Then he looked at me and said, "Elena, just my name. Not a question, not an apology. Just my name," in a voice I had not heard him use with me in a very long time. "I know," I said. We sat in silence for a moment. "Where is your brother?" I asked. My father looked at the table. "I called him this morning. He didn't come in." Of course he didn't. Derek had spent months building something that required my father's trust in my absence. The moment the structure shifted, he had known. He had probably known before the meeting was even scheduled. "I'm going to need you to say it," I said, out loud. "I need to hear you say you know I didn't do this." My father looked up. His eyes were red around the edges in a way I had not seen since my grandmother's funeral. "I know you didn't do this," he said, "and I'm sorry I didn't ask you the right questions when I should have. It wasn't enough. Not even close to enough. But it was the truth. And from my father, in that room, it was more than I had expected to get that day." Derek did not come in the next day either, or the day after that. He had already spoken to his own lawyer by the time my father tried to reach him. What followed was not quick or clean, it never is. There was a formal process. There were interviews and depositions and weeks where I didn't know which way things would fall. Carol navigated it steadily, and June remained available for every question the auditor and the lawyers had for her, which I would never forget. What I remember most from those weeks is not the legal process. It is the smaller things. The client who called me directly, who had gotten my personal number years ago during a late-night deadline push, to say that she didn't believe what she'd heard and would wait to work with me wherever I landed. The former colleague who emailed to say the same. The way June simply showed up, again and again, without being asked. And Natalie, who texted me 3 weeks into the process to say she was thinking of me, which I read for what it was: a woman watching her husband's situation deteriorate and trying to establish a small bridge before the structure collapsed entirely. I did not respond. My father called me on a Sunday evening, about 6 weeks after the auditor's report. He didn't ask me to come back to the company right away. He said something I hadn't expected: that he wanted to talk. Not about the business, just talk. The way we used to when I was younger, and before everything had become so complicated between the three of us. We met at the diner near his house, the one he had been going to since before I was born. He ordered the same thing he always ordered. We sat across from each other for a while before either of us said anything real. "I see now," he said eventually, "how long this was going on. Not just the last few months. I mean how things have been. Between you and me. I let it go on because it was easier." He paused. "That wasn't fair to you." I looked at him. He was not a man who apologized easily, and this was not a full apology, not for everything, not for years of quiet preference and small dismissals, but he was sitting across from me saying it, and that was not nothing. "I need you to understand something," I said. "I'm not coming back to the company to prove anything. If I come back, it's because we build something different, and that starts with you treating what I build there as equal to what Derek built, which means actually equal, not almost equal. Not equal until it's inconvenient." He looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded. "That's fair," he said. Derek did not come back to the company. He resigned during the legal process, before anything formal was concluded against him, which is often how it goes. I heard from my mother that he and Natalie had moved to another city. A fresh start, which is a phrase that means different things depending on what you are starting fresh from. I did not feel the satisfaction I had expected when I heard that. What I felt was closer to tired. 6 years of work and planning and hoping, and at the end of it, the thing that had brought everything to light wasn't strategy or confrontation. It was an office manager who had kept a copy of the right document and waited until someone asked the right question. I went back to Callaway Logistics 3 months after the auditor's report. Not as Derek's little sister in the corner office. My father restructured my role, and for the first time it reflected what I had actually been doing for the past 6 years. The first week back, I passed Derek's old office, which was empty now, the nameplate removed. I stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at the desk where he had once sat and planned all of it, patiently and methodically, while pretending to be my brother. I thought about what it must have taken, the patience, the careful construction, and then I thought about how all of it had come apart because of one routing discrepancy that June had noticed during a routine reconciliation and had quietly, carefully saved. It doesn't always work out this cleanly. I know that. I got lucky in specific ways: June's meticulous habit of keeping copies, an auditor with no interest in being pressured, a lawyer who knew which questions to ask and when. Take away any one of those pieces and the outcome is different. But it worked out. And what I know now, on the other side of it, is this. I spent 6 years making myself smaller to avoid conflict in a space where I had every right to stand. I accommodated someone who was not accommodating me. I told myself the work would be enough, when what I should have been doing, what I would tell anyone in my position to do, was trust what I could see. Trust the routing discrepancies. Trust the late nights that never got acknowledged. Trust the feeling in your gut that says something is wrong long before you have the documentation to prove it. You don't have to be the loudest person in the room, but you have to be honest about what the room actually is. My name is Elena. I built something that someone tried to take from me, and I got it back. That's the story. But the part that matters, the part I want you to take with you, is not the winning. It's the moment in that parking lot on a Tuesday morning when I sat in my car with nothing but a laptop bag and a framed photo, and I decided, without knowing how any of it would go, that I was not going to disappear quietly. If you're in a room right now where someone is asking you to disappear quietly, I want you to remember that you have options they are counting on you not to use. Stay tuned. There's more to share.